Hello, and welcome to Imagine an Apple, the podcast about inner mental experience with my co-host Vynn. Hi, Vynn.
Hi, Francis.
Yep, I'm Francis. And today we've got an interview with Ronja, who has an imagination. So this is a very general interview going to cover all sorts of things about Ronja's inner mental experience. Hello, Ronja.
Hi, the pleasure to be on a podcast. I've never been on a podcast before.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite unusual. So our mutual friend Manar was having lunch with you, I think.
Yes.
And he sent me this message saying, "Oh, I got my friend Ronja to imagine a gremlin on my shoulder," which is kind of interesting. And I thought it would be nice to ask about the gremlin. How did that come about? What was happening?
I think we jumped into a conversation about aphantasia. And I don't actually know how the gremlin appeared. I think it just did. I don't even think he got me to do that. I think he may have said something like, "Oh yeah, well, can you imagine things?" And I was like, "Yeah, I can imagine." And there it was. You know, it just it's quite quick. It can happen very quickly.
And it's not exactly a gremlin, is it? It's like a little monster or something. Can you describe it?
I don't know what gremlins look like, so I wouldn't have used that word. But it's a furry blue little monster with a long tail in the shape of a lightning bolt, I suppose. About as big as Manar's head. Maybe it's a little bit smaller. That's about.
And is it moving? Go on.
Sorry?
Does it look like a little Pokemon?
No. Well, I mean, maybe, yeah. I guess there are Pokemons come in all sorts of shapes and looks.
And was it doing anything, like moving and alive?
Yeah. But nothing massive. Are you thinking of like a blue Pikachu, Vynn, or something like that?
Yes, because like you mentioned having a lightning bolt tail, and I was like, ooh.
Maybe that's where it was coming from. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That was the inspiration of my imagination. It's possible.
And so the next thing I want to ask is quite hard to ask, which is to what extent is it integrated into the real world, and to what extent is it just like in a second screen in your mind's eye? And this is really hard to get the words for describing, but if you can have a go.
So hard, yeah. I think it's probably more like a second screen. It's obviously not there. Like it's very clearly not actually there. But it's almost like I take a picture of what I see and I impose something onto it on a second screen. So I take the picture of the real world into my other screen and impose onto it. And then I can place it kind of over it with like, did you ever have projectors in school? And you'd have some text on it and maybe the professor or teacher would write on top of it with an additional marker. It's a bit like that, except the screen, I can move it away and look at it here or put it back onto the real world. And I can take the real world with me into the imagination as well.
So you were imagining a Manar as well as the gremlin?
I would. I mean, it's not as solid, obviously, if I take it away, but it's very clearly still the same thing.
And spatially, is it like co-located with the real world, like Manar, and where the gremlin would be in the real world? Or is it like in a different spatial pocket?
It's definitely sitting on Manar's shoulder.
Mm-hmm. And if you turn your head and look another way, it'll still be over to the real head. So it is.
I can move it. I can move the whole picture elsewhere, right, on my second screen, my internal second screen. But it has a position, yes, in the real world.
What's its opacity like? Like, is it opaque, transparent, translucent, somewhere in between?
On my second screen, it would be solid, right? That is a question I kind of struggled with when I was thinking about it because it's not real. So
yeah.
Let me have a look.
So I'm basically aphantasic, but Vynn is reasonably phantasic. Vynn, how does this compare to if you were imagining a gremlin on someone's shoulder?
It seems pretty much like how I would imagine a gremlin on someone's shoulder. Like there's a second screen, but like obviously it's hard to describe to people what question I just asked, because it can be as opaque or as translucent as I want it to be, right? And I know it's like not real. And Ronja has a similar relationship with her imagination.
Anything else anyone wants to say about the gremlin, or should we go on to other things?
It's not just for me. It's not just an image, right? It's a creature, right? So like when you asked me, is it still? Does it move? I was a little bit taken aback because of course it moves. Like of course it's got character and it's got like. And I suppose I don't immediately know. It's not immediately that I have all the answers if you ask me questions about it. I'd have to think about it, right? And maybe I'm imposing those as we go along if you ask me questions. But it feels very like, I was going to say real, but obviously it's not real. It feels very...
Alive?
Alive? Yeah, it's a thing. It's a real thing of the imagination.
And it's
Mm.
independent from your does it move independently of your control over it? Like how much control do you have?
I would assume I have full control, but I think I probably give
Can it
it
go?
space.
Can you let it go on autopilot? Is what I'm asking.
Ooh. I mean, the way I would say that is I would if you asked me a question about it, I wouldn't make a decision in my head and go, it's doing this now. I would kind of look at it and it would do something. So you could say that it has a certain space for its own, like, control itself, but in reality, of course, it's my imagination, you know. Something in my head has decided it's doing this, right?
So if I saw a real gremlin as well as visual stimulus, I guess I might hear it, but also I would have like a reaction to it, like an emotional reaction, or I would know the gremlin like be afraid or happy or friendly. It would impact my mood, right? So it sounds a bit like it is doing that to you as well. So it's like a full, as if that actually was there.
Yeah, it can, if I pay attention to it. It's interesting because I kind of said it in passing. It wasn't very important to me, and we might have never, you know, spoken on it again, and it may have therefore kind of disappeared back into wherever it came from very, very quickly. But because we started talking about it, it was there throughout the lunch. Yeah.
Okay, another question. As you were speaking about like the gremlin, did it also happen to have other features such as sound, like smells, or did you not notice it before? And
No, I don't. I mean, I think smell for sure not. I can't imagine smell really.
okay,
That's
yeah.
really difficult. Yeah, I'm just trying to imagine or kind of create the experience of a certain smell, and I can't really do that.
What about
Maybe
sound?
like the feeling that's associated with the smell, maybe, but not the smell itself. So that's definitely not something I would be able to. Versus sounds, sounds an interesting one because I can probably, yeah, I can imagine sounds, but they are a lot less. I'm much less able to have them imposed on the real world.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
And I'm quite musical, so I sounds are really important to me. Music's really important to me. Songs are very tied to emotions for me, and so I've never thought about creating sounds in my head. When I think about composers who are able to hear an entire piece of music in their head, or even conductors when they look at scores, they can hear it, the whole thing. I can't do that. So I always thought that was crazy and kind of incredibly impressive. Yeah. Maybe something to look into. Maybe you can get a composer or conductor on your podcast.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we really want to do that. But you can imagine sounds like in memory. It's just you can't imagine a sound from the score, but can you remember a song and you hear the song?
Yeah, but normally I would remember it by expressing it, so like singing it or humming it, or I have to
Okay.
kind of I have to hum inside. I can't just, so I'm not actually humming, but I it feels like I'm humming.
Yeah, that's like articulatory in a voice
Yeah,
thing, as opposed to audio, hearing the thing.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So I have to create it. It's not just there. I suppose that's the difference.
So you wouldn't hear the instrument that played it originally in your head. Then it would be hearing yourself humming it.
Sorry, I'm testing. I'm testing just a second. It's very quiet testing.
Feel free to sing.
Yeah, I actually think it's hard for me to imagine it being a different. Imagine is obviously the wrong word here now. What's the word for sound? The
Oh well,
equivalent
it
of
is
imagine.
imagine. We're gonna like we need to like standardize this vocabulary at some point, but like imagine just applies to like the whole sensory modality, and if you want to like imagize, then you reserve that for like the visual stimuli.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
audize it.
Yeah, this is interesting because this is about the level of my audio imagination in that I can sing in with my articulatory voice in my mind, but I can't hear instruments. But my sense is quite a lot of people can like remember certainly four instruments in a rock band in some detail and
Yeah, I
play
can
a
do
whole
that.
song to them. You can do that, Vin.
I can do that.
Wait, what do you mean by that?
Are you asking me or like Francis?
Well, either of you. Yeah. What is it that? Can you describe what that means? Because it does sound like something I might be able to do.
So I can imagine like a symphony, like an orchestra right now, with at least four different melodic lines and like four different instruments playing at the same time. And I think if I try to like imagine any more than that, that's when like I blow. But the strings, the percussions, the woodwinds, I can imagine them like quite clearly, and it doesn't take too much effort. So that kind of like musical imagination in my head comes relatively easy, and I think this is what a lot of people like struggle with.
Hmm. Yeah. No, I can't do that. I could do one at a time. And that's kind of what I was talking about when I talked about composers or conductors who are able to do that, but with a lot more instruments. Well, I can't
Yeah,
do.
there's accounts of people doing it with hundreds and scores that were never played and were really complicated because they were too hard to play, and they played them centuries later and they sounded right because the person had heard them in their mind's ear.
Exactly.
I'm
Yeah.
trying.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it's quite amazing. While we're talking about sound, so you mentioned something about triggering songs when things happen, like people or
I think it's more memory, maybe.
yeah, oh, memories.
Yeah. So for me, memories are incredibly visual, but other senses also conjure up memories very vividly, and that includes smell and sound. And so if let's say if you introduced me to a song, well, we don't really have a very close relationship, but if we had a close relationship and you introduced me to a song at a certain time of my life, and I heard the song later, it would pull me back exactly to that, which is sometimes great and sometimes crap because some people introduce me to really great music and I cannot untangle it from the person or from the time it was introduced to me. I've got a great story. Sorry, yeah.
So it's when you physically hear the song, it's triggering a visual memory.
I think I could probably do that, yeah, but it's more of a feeling and a memory. Memory doesn't have to be visual. Yeah, so you're right. My memory is very visual, as in, like, I think I remember. I don't think about it that way, but if you ask me, it is definitely visual. I might see the person in my mind's eye. But it's more the feeling of the relationship potentially. Let's say it's an ex-boyfriend, or most recently I was made redundant from a job. Let's say my junior had. Actually, there are a few very good bands that she introduced me to. So if I hear those now, I will be kind of thrown back into that the combinations of emotions from that time. So kind of very, very intertwined.
Yeah, so that's emotional memory, which I
Yeah.
haven't heard many people talk about in great detail. So I can remember emotions as well. I will have that in that something might remind me of something that happened, even though I don't get any visual imagery.
Yeah, I would see her face and her hair, which is part of her face, I suppose, and have the feelings of the time. And then I would probably it often triggers a bit of like a video sequence of things in terms of imagery. It's not just like a still image. I would probably kind of start reminiscing through the shared experience, whatever that is. Yeah.
And how prominent is the audio component of this video sequence?
The audio doesn't feature. It's more that I've now heard the song and it throws me back. So it doesn't actually, there's no audio element to that, except if I think about, I can remember and hear again what people have said and how they said it. So maybe if there's some sort of conversation that I reminisce over, I can hear that. I can hear the tone of voice and the person's voice. And it isn't very clear. It's a little bit like, people who are photogenic, they'll really see the exact picture. For me, it's not as good. It's kind of the focus isn't perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's more schematic. You get the gist of it rather than
exactly.
the crisp details.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that layering for all of the senses is really interesting. But my senses, you can push it back further and further to more granular detail, the actual sense, or to just the response to the sense. And there's loads of levels of that. Because I definitely have all the later levels where I remember the response to the thing, and even though I don't have very much the actual sense. That's super interesting.
I don't know if you ever want to use this, but so one of the things that I can never untangle and is really ridiculous, but also kind of funny, is that when I was around 10, I got the Harry Potter books for Christmas, 1 and 2, and my brother got the CD for Buena Vista Social Club, which is a brilliant Cuban band. And it's a really, really great music. So he put it on repeat and I didn't notice. So I finished both of those books that night and kept listening to this one album over and over and over again. And now whenever I hear Buena Vista Social Club, I am immediately in Hogwarts or wherever, Harry Potter is. It is just the weirdest connection. It makes no sense to anybody else, but it's just completely entwined. There is no way I will ever be able to untangle that and hear Buena Vista Social Club without thinking of Harry Potter. And even if I read Harry Potter now, I probably would also kind of get the sense or the feeling that the music evokes as well. It is so odd.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how often this is happening in people. So when we're having conversations with people and the person's recalling something that we might not conceive of, or something's happening in them. And sometimes people say, but most of the time it's not really appropriate or doesn't really fit with the conversation. You kind of can't say, I suddenly had this memory of this thing. Or And yeah, it's actually quite significant to them emotionally during the conversation and probably having quite an impact on the conversation, but it's very invisible.
Yeah, that's very true. The emotional impact can be pretty big, but it might not be appropriate to bring it up.
Right. Let's move on to talk about practical things, tooling. I would describe it as almost, which we've not talked about before much on the podcast. Yeah. So you mentioned looking for keys, which is one of these interesting things of how people find things. So if you've lost something, what happens in your inner experience of finding the thing?
I see images of where it could be, and I search those images for the keys. So, for example, yesterday I was looking for my laptop, and an image popped up in my head of the last place I'd seen it, which was exactly where it was, under on the couch, between the pillow and the couch. So you wouldn't have been able to see it otherwise if you didn't know it was there, with actually something covering it. Somebody had just thrown something over it. But it was an image in I was thinking, where's my laptop? And then I think the process is, I think about what my laptop looks like. So I imagine my laptop, and that is then something I scan for in my memory. And then the image of where I last saw it pops up with the laptop in it.
Does you jump through other places, or does it just go
Sometimes,
straight from the laptop to the correct place?
Yesterday it was direct, but I think often if I'm not sure, I'll go through various places, yeah.
And it might go, oh, this place, no, it's not there. This place, it's exactly the same as if you'd walk around the house and looked at the place, almost. But
and I might be doing that at the same time, right? I might be walking around the house as well at the same time to those places. Or I might think, I think I last saw it there, I go there and it's not there, because that image wasn't actually the last place I saw it at. It might have been, the place before, or somebody moved it. But it's very much like, where's Waldo? In my head, when I look at where's Waldo, I imagine the thing I'm looking for and then scan the picture for the thing I'm looking for. So it's almost like I've got another layer. I'm layering the reality with my imagination of what I'm looking for and trying to find where it matches. I think that's probably a good description of it.
It's kind of a wild question. Do you think doing Where's Waldo helps train people to find things?
Maybe. I mean, it depends. If you've look, I think in my experience, I can imagine that it would. Like there's a game called Set, I think. Have you heard of that one? Yeah. So I think that's the kind of thing where you're training yourself. The more you play it, the better you'll get, like for sure. Except if you really lack that ability. So someone quite close to me has aphantasia, so you can see kind of like some shadows if you imagine something. But for example, he doesn't dream in pictures at all. His dreams and he doesn't have any childhood memories. So there's quite a lot of aphantasia stuff going on. He hates playing that game because he just can't do it. Like he's incredibly slow and compared to anybody who has much more of a visual, ability.
So this is the one where there are lots of shapes with different colors and textures, and you have to find a set of 3 that all have the same color or all have different colors,
or all the same shape or all different shapes, or all the same texture or different texture, or a combination of those. Yeah.
And you have to have all of those. You have to have like all the same shape and different colors and the same texture. I certainly find it quite hard to play it. I'm hyperphantasic. Interesting. Yeah.
I
so
think
when
you
you're
can
playing
probably
that,
train yourself, but I suspect that when it comes to neurodivergent, I think it's hilarious that we still say well, it kind of makes sense. There is probably, I don't even know if there is a normal. There's probably like an average, right? You look at a Gaussian distribution and like, this is normal. But that means actually the most of the people aren't actually on that exact point which we think is normal. So yeah, it depends where you are on that distribution in so many dimensions. If you can train yourself, and maybe you could even train yourself if you're at the very lower end. We don't know. We've never tried. It's very hard to say. I think that friend of mine, he would just find it very he just wouldn't see the point. He would just find it very difficult and kind of not interesting.
I'm fairly confident it's possible for most people to train to get better.
Have you been able to train and get better?
I mentioned this before. I did a set of 6 lessons for an hour long each with someone called Aphantasia Meow on the internet, who's like a coach who can coach you. And I did get some more visual imagery.
That's so interesting.
In a very limited way, but yeah. And it was clear that doing it more would basically you use words to make the mind pay attention to visual details. So you describe things in incredible visual detail that you're actually looking at, and then close your eyes and describe them again, but not being able to look at them. That's and there were lots of exercises of that nature. And I think if I actually did it an hour a day for 6 months, I think I'd probably get quite good.
Yeah.
But it's the same as do I manage to do my piano practice? It's like, do you learn a language? You have to actually really have the motivation. And if you're an adult and you spent your whole life without an imagination, you don't quite have the motivation because you've adapted in other ways.
Yeah, fascinating. So things come easier for some than others. It's like talent. When you want to be a classical musician, they typically say it's 99% practice and 1% talent. If you have the 1%, the 99 will be much, much easier for you than the others will find it. But
Yeah.
it's only 1%.
Yeah. Yeah. Vin, do you look for keys the same way?
No, I don't. I just remember where it is, and if I don't,
But
then it's
No
obvious.
imagery at all.
I don't use imagery for that. I just try to like think, like retrace my steps, and
when you retrace your steps, do you see imagery?
not so much imagery as in like episodes in my mind. It's like, oh, it's probably like in my bag. I don't imagine my bag. I just like, oh, it's in. There's like
Yeah.
instructions where it's like, oh, it's in my bag. Go check in the bag. So I
The
don't
moment you
use
say
my.
bag, I see a bag. I can't not see a
Oh, I
bag.
don't see a bag. I don't not necessarily like the I think you're definitely much more visual than I am.
Okay.
You're definitely like slightly more like pro phantasic than I am. Whereas I think I'm making up for it by having more like auditory like imagination. But yes, I don't necessarily automatically see a visual stimulus with the concept that I'm like imagining.
Yeah.
Bringing this segueing into like this other concept I'm interested to ask you about is, have you heard of this thing called shape rotator, like shape rotating?
I'm rotating a shape in my head right now, but
Okay,
no,
yeah.
I've not heard of it.
Okay, so basically it's what it says. Shape rotating is like it's popularized on Twitter, but it's essentially this ability some people have and a lot of people don't have, where you can like imagine a shape and just like manipulate it spatio-temporally. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure how connected it is to like visual and pro-phantasic ability, but I think they seem to be like very similar. Considering that you're quite like above average when it comes to the visual manipulation, how do you think it fares with spatio-temporal object manipulation, basically shape rotating?
How does it what? How does it
How does it compare? Like how does
Oh.
it fare? Like, can you imagine a Rubik's cube and then like solve it in your head? Like,
Or if you're putting together some flat pack furniture, can you like in your head imagine the piece was in its place and how everything connects to it and it be
Yeah.
accurate? Like,
Yeah.
is it spatially accurate for a
Yeah,
practical
and
purpose?
I'm very good at DIY, especially putting together furniture. So yeah, so I can imagine that it does. I can't really separate them, to be honest. What you were saying about shape shifting and spatial awareness, to me, it's almost the same.
okay, it's
So
interesting.
you do see things in your imagination a lot when you're doing something like DIY as to how the things fit together. Or
When I look at instructions, I mean, I mostly build at IKEA, so I have to visualize it. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense to me. And actually, that's true for many things if they have a 3D component.
Okay, give it another example, please.
Driving somewhere, so directions.
Okay, yeah.
If you tell me, if somebody says drive straight to, until you hit the junction, I will see a junction, and that's how I remember that I have to drive to that junction. And then if you see a supermarket, like I will really like it'll always be picture related, I think. And left and right, they have like they're almost visual. Like I'll see an arrow left or an arrow right. It's very hard for me to imagine how people do that without.
Okay. Can you imagine map? Does the map come automatically in your head whenever you're
Yeah.
navigating?
So not always. I think one of the things I used to struggle with is very interesting. If I drive the same way every day, or like let's say every week for a year, which I've done before, I will recognize a lot of things on the way because even if I've just done it once, I will recognize many like things. Be like, oh yeah, I've definitely seen this shop before. I've definitely seen this tree before. I've definitely seen this junction. And so I know I'm on the right way, and I'll be like, okay, well, this is the place where I need to turn left because I remember this picture. But if you ask me afterwards, what sequence, I don't know if I could always tell you. And actually, I've experienced where I would go down the same way every week, and I would be like, I think the next thing is this, and it wouldn't be. It would be like two other things before that one. So it's really weird, right? Because so if you're asking me, am I visualizing the map? Clearly not, because they're not necessarily in the same or in the correct order.
Right. You're relying more on landmarks rather than like an internalized map.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's interesting because like this is how I also navigate, and sometimes it's really embarrassing because sometimes I will go to the nearest city and I know the place very well because I've always been in the car with someone else driving, so I'll recognize the places of where we're going and where we end up uh, getting at. But when I start to drive by myself, I always have trouble like figuring out, okay, I'm here now. I know where we are supposed to go, but I don't know which road to take sometimes, and I get very confused very easily. And it's like, I know this place. I've been here so many times. I've just never had to like think about driving and the direction. So I
So the
guess
direction is linked with me in the pic for the picture. So actually, but I think I am the one driving. So, but even when I wasn't driving, I could do the same. When I was a child, I remember the same. I would remember like places that my parents would drive me through, and I would know you have to turn left here or you have to turn. So that's very interlinked. Yeah.
so it sounds like you've got a good map, like a sense of direction. It's like much better than
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I'm saying that slightly negatively because it ends up being me always.
So you use both landmarks and an imagined version of the map. Then was that the
Yeah, and I also really enjoy looking at a map because it's visual.
yeah?
Right. So looking at a map, I can if I cycle somewhere in London, I'll use City Mapper and I'll look at City Mapper when I leave the house, and I will try to remember. Okay, this junction looks like in my head, I'll see the junction. Okay, I have to turn right here, and then I have to turn left here, and I'll try to remember the sequence and ideally not have to look at my phone on the way.
So when you say you'll see the junction, you're making up. Well, you don't look at the street view picture of the junction.
No, it's
you just make up
if I
from
know
this
it.
angle. This is the shape of the road.
No, if I know it, then I'll remember what it
Oh.
looks like. If I don't know it, I might actually go on Street View.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But that's a lot of effort. But if I'm looking for a place like my end destination, I might go on Street View, look at what the building actually looks like, and then I will know that I'm in the right place.
Yeah. But you don't see the map in your mind's eye yourself.
I can, yeah. So if I don't know, that was kind of what I was trying to say. If I look at City Mapper, I will remember kind of what the route looks like in my head, as in the map.
And what will it look exactly like City Mapper, like the typography and the colours, or is it your own version of the map?
Thematically, yes.
So yes.
It's not going to be exactly the same picture, but yes.
Yeah. So if you looked at a different map, it would look different. You remember the
so
actual
in my
map
head,
you just saw.
it's green because City Mapper is like directional, like tends to be the green line, right? So I that's what I'm seeing when I'm talking to you.
You don't have like a permanent map that you bring up without looking at the map. Yeah. Interesting. So the variety of this is super interesting because some people do. They have a constantly like a map that's their ever map, and they just update it.
No, I don't have that.
And some people haven't. The diversity of this is just astonishing. So even people with very good imaginations, I talked to somebody who had a really good imagination, but it had never occurred to them to use their imagination to navigate, and they just always would get lost. And they neither remembered landmarks nor a map. And it's like, what? If you've got a good imagination, surely you remember the map. It's just
something else played.
Really interesting diversity. Right. So while we're on practical things, a common thing that I haven't heard enough conversation about is how people remember like names and faces, things like that.
I'm terrible.
With what? The names or the faces?
Names. So I found a way that helps me, which is when I have to say the name several times when I meet the person. So if you introduce yourself, right, Francis, I'll say, "Oh, nice to meet you, Francis." I have to consciously say the name several times in our first conversation, and potentially the day after, and then maybe a month after or a week after. And that's the only way I'll remember your name. If I don't do that, names are not important. Like they don't stick in my memory, just the same as dates. I was awful at history because I couldn't remember names of people, dates of whatever happened, events, historical events, which is what school used to test for. And I'm terrible at it. And I'll remember it for a short time only. So Francis, if we meet in a year, I might have no chance of remembering your name. But if we've spent an hour on a call, I will remember your face, but I have no idea where to put it.
So when you do remember a name, do you hear the audio of yourself saying it or them saying it, or does it just arise as a word in your mind, or do you see the name?
I think I see the letters.
You see the letters?
Yeah. I think that's also how I spell. When someone asks me how a word is spelled, I have to imagine it written, and then I'll read off the letters.
And is it in a particular format, like font, or?
I don't know. Probably different varies.
Sans serif.
Well, it's always the same font.
I don't think so necessarily. No.
I think I have a default font.
A default one, but it might be different for different people, or
no, it's like the same font for.
Yeah. And even if you've never seen their name written down, like you heard
Yeah,
it
I'll
audibly,
try to remember it.
you remember it via the written version.
I'll ask them actually. I often ask, how do you spell that? If I meet someone new and I don't know how to spell their name, I will ask them. And it's not because I'm saving their number in my phone. It's because that is how I remember or actually can really understand what the name is.
Yeah, I do that as well. But I don't think it's an imagery I have of the word. I think it's the concept of the letters in the word and of the word, which is a slightly different thing. I bet there are people who just remember the audio. Have to try and just seems so likely someone will do it by remembering the audio, right?
So I tend to like rely more on the audio than like visualizing the spelling. And this is like how I typically remember like more foreign names, because like the other day, for example, there's this guy called Younger, and I was like, I'm not gonna remember how to spell that. I'm just gonna have to like remember it phonetically. And indeed, like it's spelled with an I. I was never gonna like. I think if you spelled it out, I would just like mess up the
So,
pronunciation even more.
so do you hear it in your mind's ear when you remember it?
Yes, it's a lot easier for
And
me to like remember with my mind's ear.
and do you hear it like as if like when they said it when they were introducing themselves, or do you hear yourself saying it?
I think if I was to like, I think it's probably the latter. It's probably like me remembering their name and then using my pronunciation of it. Yeah. Okay.
Now that you've said that, I think there is a big phonetic component for me as well, but I have to read it first. So, or maybe I don't. It's so hard because you're asking me questions that I've never been asked before, right? And I've never asked myself before. It's the inner experience that just is, right? You never question it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now that you've been talking about it, Vin, yeah, I think, and I'm quite good at pronouncing it correctly after I hear it. So there must be some sort of record, right? But it's not so conscious as the pictures are, as the visual is.
What I perceive this to be is like we have a lot of overlap in our abilities, like you and me, Ronja, except that you tend to like rely more on the visual side, and I tend to rely more on like the side. It's not like you can't do what I do. It's just that you kind of default to the visual, and it's not like I can't do your visual things. So, for example, when I'm remembering names, I could do that. I could like imagine the spelling, visualize it, but I tend to like default on like the phonetic.
That's amazing. And it gives lots of routes to improve your ability with names and faces, right? You could pay attention to one or the other, or practice.
I'll create rhymes as well if I need to remember something. So I'm Austrian, so I speak German. It's my mother tongue, and we call it a donkey's bridge. Like when I don't know why it's called a donkey's bridge. Maybe because I'm a donkey because I can't remember something and I need a bridge between like the thing I'm trying to remember. I need something else to remember it. But yeah, so either a rhyme or something else. Numbers, like I'll make up random stories with the number, with the individual numbers, and therefore I then suddenly remember the number I would have otherwise never remembered. It's like odd how our memory.
So does the rhyme make it easier to remember? You remember the rhyme more easily than the name, almost?
I forget the rhyme and I remember the name, or I forget the rhyme and I remember the numbers. It's just, I think it's just if I had to try to explain it, I would say it's almost like stamping the memory in to my brain. And this is one of the techniques, but it's not that I necessarily remember the rhyme at all, or it's like repeating someone's name. You're just repeating the numbers.
Yeah.
It's like
it's not the same as memory experts who write a story and imagine the story, and the story's got things associated with numbers, and therefore they remember the numbers.
It's way too complicated.
Yeah.
It might be like that, but like in a more rudimentary. Another like example that I can think of is like when someone, and this is a more comical version, but like when someone introduces themselves, they repeat their name by like doing it in a weird voice. So like, "Hi, my name is Alice." "Hello, Alice," and it's just like this weird.
Yeah, that would work totally.
And like you don't like when you remember the name, you're not going Alice in your head all the time, but like because you did it the first time, it kind of like stamps it in your head, and it just somehow helps.
I will do this now forever, and my friends will hate you, Vin, for the recommendation.
I think I learned this from like a scary movie 4 or something. One of those like parodies.
That's so good.
So, Ronnie, do you have any visualization of time, like whether today or the week or your life or history? One that you use?
I am not sure what you mean by that, actually.
So when you're thinking about when things happen, do you see any imagery associated with that or not?
I don't think I see visualizations of time specifically, but it will be of what I need to do. So if I need to go pick up my son from nursery, I will imagine the nursery, or I'll imagine the place that I then see him. But I won't think of, that's not time,
But if
right?
you've got to pick them up on the nursery on Thursday, you won't have like a picture of the week with like the days on it,
Maybe?
and then them in Thursday. Or what's another good
Yeah,
example?
that's really interesting. Yeah, I'm becoming a little bit more aware, but it's very complicated. I don't know if it's always that way. When you say Thursday, I was seeing the word Thursday spelled out. Thursday also has a specific feeling to me, and I think there was a feeling associated with Thursday. So like it's very like
Multimodal. Yeah.
multimodal. Yeah, definitely.
So by a feeling, you mean because it's like the one before last day of the week, like the emotional feeling of Thursday,
Also,
or
how the word feels,
the consonants,
The concept of Thursday.
the concept. Yeah, is a whole jumble of all sorts of things. Actually, I don't think it's necessarily. I couldn't. And when you then pick on one, it becomes not as real, not as right, because there's so many other things that have to happen at the same time.
So it's February now. If you're thinking about the whole year, or next year, or last year, is there any like visual or spatial? So if you're thinking, what I'm going to do in the summer, this is happening in early summer. In the autumn, this might happen.
So summer, I would immediately imagine the place we always go to for holidays, on a lake in Austria. So I will have a visual image of that probably.
Mm.
And the image has weather, like a sun attached to it, and a temperature attached to it, and a feeling that you get when you're there.
So if someone says, I don't know, how many months is it until July?
Oh, I have to count.
And you don't get a sense anyway, even if you don't know the exact number, you don't go, oh, it's like this kind of amount
Yeah,
in some visual
maybe.
way, or
Yeah,
interesting.
there's definitely a gap. Like I know there's a gap. If you ask me when's March, I would be like, yeah, it's right. It's immediate.
Yeah. So, yeah, so I'm asking because, some people do have very strong visual and would immediately give a very complicated answer. Yeah, I personally definitely have the year in a circle, and I'm aware, like, where in the circle I am, like the winter's at the bottom and the summer's at the top.
I think for me, it's not a circle. It's definitely like a straight
A
line
line.
somehow. Yeah, it's more
How's
like
the
a
line
calendar year.
arranged in space?
January to December. Sorry?
It's like left to right.
Yeah, or forward.
Oh, away from you.
I think so.
It's a platform going away from you.
Yeah. Hence,
And
there's a gap.
February's here.
Like it's over there.
Interesting.
But does it loop around so they'll be like next summer, and that'll
No.
be pretty far away?
And I think that it used to be September to July because that was the school year. And
Yeah.
that was very strongly. I mean that was a year, right? And now I've shifted because I'm no longer haven't been in school for a long time. And that's January to January.
So the end of year
Some people call it
exams.
the tax year or something. I don't know.
Yeah, the end of year exams looming in the distance at this point. Anyway, okay, yeah.
Oh, just to add to that, like I think now that you guys mentioned like yours is a circle and yours is like a straight line, mine's like 12 boxes.
In a 3x4 grid.
Is it a 3x4 grid? Yeah, I guess so. It's like
So how's it go? Like January, February?
It's more like 2x5 grid, and then like 2 extra leftover like boxes for December and November or something.
So you've got like January, then February, then on the next row, March, April, or
Do you
and
know
then
why? Where does
January.
that come from?
I guess I just look at like Google Maps and like when I zoom out, because like you have like various ways to like format it, right? Google Maps has like the zoomed out version and like
Google Calendar.
Sorry, yeah, Google Calendar. Google Calendar is what I meant. And like when you have the year view, you have like 12 boxes. That's like the 12 months. Yeah, that's how I imagine it.
So interesting. I think that's totally. We get influenced so much by the things around us, and visuals are so connected, right, with what we use. I used to dream if I was working in Excel for too long, I would dream in Excel. Like it was.
Oh yeah.
It's just
legit.
I learned to read the time with an analog clock on the wall of in the 1970s of my parents' house, and I definitely think I associate times of day with the positions of a clock of the hour hand more than if I'd learnt time from a digital clock first. Yeah. I'm gonna okay. So last topic and then a closing topic. Emotion and memory. You talked about horror movies, which seems like a fun entry point. So you have immediately got a reaction. What were you feeling then?
I'm the wrong person to talk to about horror movies, but actually that's probably not true. I'm just one person, right? With a certain experience. I cannot watch them. I think things for me they're too real. Everything's real. If I read a book, I'm in the book, and everything that's happening in the book is real. And movies are worse because I can't I can't, you know how children, they'll understand what they can understand at the time. So if you introduce them to a topic that's maybe not quite age appropriate, they will if it's not visual, they'll probably just understand and take in what they can where they with where they're at. And for me, I'm now an adult, so I probably have the ability to take it all in, and it all becomes absolutely real immediately. And horror movies, I'm in the horror movie, so while other people are laughing and thinking about how badly it was, I don't know, done, it doesn't matter at all. It's just real, and so it's absolutely terrifying. And I just can't. There's no point. I'm also a little bit too sensitive, and that's not just for horror movies. Things can be too funny, too silly, too
Cringe.
thrilling. Sorry, too cringe. Oh yeah, too cringe. Absolutely, too scary.
So what's happening in? This is pretty easiest to ask about with the book. When you're reading a book, do you get any other modes of thought, like imagery or audio, or
all of it?
So can you describe what it feels like? Like, what's it like?
Well, I'm there.
So when you're reading Harry Potter,
yeah.
So whose perspective? Like, who would you be? So Harry Potter's doing something in Hogwarts. Would you be Harry Potter, or would you be like a camera in the air looking at him, or would you? What would happen? How good quality is it?
Well, it depends on the narrative, right? So if it's a book, I think I'm probably where the narrator is. So if it's an I form, I'll probably be the person. Versus if it's narrated from third perspective, I'll probably also be there. And I remember at some point I read this it was a kid's book in reality, but it was very like someone in the book betrayed their best friend. And I remember feeling so guilty. And I was not a child anymore. I felt so guilty. And I met a friend and I was like, I feel so guilty. Like I feel like I've done something to you, but I know it's just because I read this book. Like it's not.
And that was because it was written in the first person, whereas if it had been written in the third person, you would have felt less guilty.
No, I don't think it was written in the person actually. So I can impose myself into it. Like I kind of can imagine how other people feel. So I don't know if it's probably not how they feel exactly, but I have my own interpretation of how they feel, and that is how I will feel.
Yeah. So that's a very strong emotional imagination.
Huge, yeah. It's slightly. I would say it's almost. It can be really helpful, but it's quite limiting.
It's sticky. It makes your emotions sticky because once you're no longer exposed to the movie, the book, the stimulus, whatever, you still keep that emotion when you're interacting with other people in your daily life.
Yeah.
And so you're still stuck in the guilt, even though you're no longer reading the book about the shame, or you're still feeling scared, even though you're no longer watching the movie and being scared.
And I know the thing in the movie happened in the movie and isn't happening in reality, but it doesn't matter because it's kind of it's shifted into the real world.
You're still immersed in that situation.
And it can last a long time, especially with horror movies.
How long? You don't mind me asking?
It might happen that years later I'll think about it.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I keep using the word untangle, but I have to consciously go, and I know I need time, like to separate my life and reality out from what I've just experienced.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So that must mean that you must find it very difficult or overwhelming watch like distressing videos on Instagram or Twitter or like
I won't.
You won't. Okay, I get it. Yeah.
No, I also don't read the news. At some point, I decided there was no point because the news nowadays is like every day reading things that really has no impact on your life, and you can't impact it either. I mean, I'll read things like weekly journals, where it's kind of at a different level, not the daily kind of giving you highs and lows thing, because it would impact me too much, and it would just not be helpful in any way. At all.
When you're seeing a film, there's already imagery and sound. Do you kind of augment them, or do you just use whatever there is and it's just less?
It's kind of that's why I find it more difficult at reading books, because it's imposed. It's someone else's imagery and audio, and like audio in movies is so powerful in creating emotions. That's why they use it, right? It's so powerful. I am completely defenseless.
Oh, so you don't like the movies because it's too powerful, not because right? Okay, and is it harder work reading a book because you have to do more work to create the imagery, or it's fine? It just appears as good quality as a movie.
If it's a good book, or if it draws you in.
Yeah, and even though you're deciding where the camera is and filling in details in the background,
it just happens, right? There's no decision.
Yeah, but your brain's doing it, right?
And that's also one of the reasons why I can't I'm quite lazy, I'd say, in certain respects. Like I don't really need to read nonfiction because it doesn't come out of like that is a lot of work. Reading nonfiction is a lot of work for me because there isn't any imagery and there isn't any story. Well, sometimes there is, not always. I can read an autobiography because that's a story. But if it's not a story, then it has a lot less. I'd really have to think about the concept to understand, or the concepts of the things that are being talked about, in order to create a feeling or create a memory or create anything. Versus if it's a fictional book or a story, it's automatic. It's just kind of like
It just grips you.
there it is.
It just grips you. Whereas like
Yeah.
fiction, nonfiction, you don't have you don't need to like be gripped by.
Yeah. It was one of the things that shocked me when I discovered, when I realized I was aphantasic, and I was like, hang on, why do we even have movies? Because if people can see all this imagery when they're just reading, is it even necessary?
I mean, it's someone else's interpretation, right? It can be really interesting and exciting. And I haven't seen everything in my life, right? So it still serves a huge purpose, right?
And it also gives you material you can then use to imagine later with in other segments.
For sure. I'm sure that happens, yeah.
Great.
And then if you read a book and then you watch a movie after, it can be really weird because you have your own imagery, right? You have your own feelings, and then somebody else's feelings are there being presented to you, a different interpretation of what you've read.
Yeah.
Okay, let's wrap it up.
Yeah. I want to ask you as a final question if you can imagine an apple.
Yeah.
Can you describe your apple?
It's round. It's green and red, like kind of converging. It's a normal apple size, not a small one, just a normal one. It's got a pip. Sorry, what's pip is inside. I'm really bad at explaining. Like I lack the language, I think, here. I don't normally describe apples. What is the thing? The stem. It has a stem that's brown. It's a bit shiny. It's sitting on a plate by a window in the sun, partially in the sun, not fully. It's a bit waxy. Like the outside is a bit shiny. It's a bit boring because it's just standing there. And I was never a fan of still art.
And it immediately appeared with the plate and the window as well. As soon as
No, the plate wasn't there. And it also felt a little unnatural to say because I imposed that when I was thinking about where it was. But it was definitely in the kitchen, and there was definitely a window behind it, and there was definitely light.
But it was in a non-specified place to start with. It was just.
I was imagining my own kitchen.
Right. Oh, okay. So you're more remembering your kitchen with an apple in it.
You could say that, yeah.
You could put it anywhere else, though, couldn't you?
I can put it anywhere. It's on your head now.
Yeah.
No one tell sort of situation going on here.
Yeah. That's a reasonably good quality apple, I think.
It's quite big, though, in comparison to your head. Don't think it's actually, like, correct dimensions imposed on your head.
Cool. And with that, you have just imagined an apple.
Thank you so much.
This is great fun. Yeah, I hope you put together some amazing episodes. I'm going to definitely listen to them.
This is a good episode. I like this.
It's so interesting. But I think it's more interesting to think about it yourself, to be prompted to think about these things, because you never do.
And discover like, oh wow, I just took this for granted, and other people don't have this kind of imagination.
Exactly.